Let's talk about where we are with Nigel Farage. A barrage of allegations against him in recent weeks. Let's talk to someone who, knows an awful lot about those allegations. Michael Crick is a journalist and broadcaster and also author of the book One Party After Another, The Disruptive Life of Nigel Farage. A very good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, a lot of the allegations about sort of the racism allegations, the anti-Semitic slurs and the singing of Hitler songs that have been breaking in the news in the last few weeks, those were included, many of those, in your book about Nigel Farage. You followed him around, spent a lot of time talking to former school classmates and the like. I suppose my first question to you is, do you think that Nigel Farage did say some of those things? Because we've got classmates, a lot of them saying he did. A lot of other classmates say he didn't. What is your judgment on that?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that he did. The number of people who themselves were victims of these, slurs is too mild a word. It was racist, anti-Semitic bullying.
Yeah. Go back to where you're from. Hitler was right. Gas the Jews.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the latest one, Yinka Bankole, who came out on Friday, Saturday, talking about, I mean, he was 9 at the time and Farage was 16, 17. And he talks about how, Farage said, Africa's over there, go back there, and sort of waited for him at the school gates. I mean, in a way, the bullying is worse than the racism, I think.
I mean, this is...
And that is part of his character that we definitely still exists to this day.
Okay.
It's complicated. I definitely think there are so many witnesses now. I mean, the number that it's up to is getting on for 30. It was somewhere about 15 at the time I wrote the book. And what's also happened is that people I spoke to who wouldn't go on the record have now done so.
Okay. So it's a number of people who are making allegations and people say no smoke without fire. What about the claim that, look, a lot of this is people who have an axe to grind? They're big Remainers. They're very much on the left. They're people who don't like Nigel Farage. Do you think that's a fair defence?
Not really. I mean, you would expect people to go to a private school in South London, Dulwich area, to be more Remain than Brexit. That's how the votes went in 2016 in this.
Yeah, but we're talking about something that happened, 40 years before then.
Oh, well, of course we are. So what I say is I don't think you can say it's politically motivated.
Okay.
I mean, some of these people had to be really persuaded to come out and say what they did. Inevitably, in a group of 29 people, some are going to have political connections, but it's very few.
OK. When Nigel Farage hit back on Friday in a press conference, basically at the BBC, and going, well, come on, it was a different time. Ain't Half Hot Mum, the black and white minstrel show, what. You and I are old enough and ugly enough. We remember it was a very, very different time then. He's only a few years older than me now. I don't remember, certainly at my school, but I went to a comp, so maybe it was different from nasty public schools in London at the time. That was something that was an issue. Certainly wasn't. I certainly remember it being an issue at my school, but. It was a nastier time. Racism was much more blatant and open, and lots of black and Asian children who came to this country with their parents recall having slurs shouted at them in the street. Is there any way that the defence can be? Because let's face it, Nigel Farage hasn't said it never happened. He hasn't said that.
I think his lawyer has.
His lawyer has. But Nigel Farage seems to say he doesn't. He's kind of circumvented. Is there a defence that he may or may not have said some of the nastier things? He may have been a bit of a nasty little piece of work, may have been a bully, but some of the things he said were not unusual for playgrounds at that time in the late 70s and early 80s, and in particular in public schools where, frankly, everyone seems to be horrible to everybody. Is that in any way a defence?
Well, I went to a very similar school to Nigel Farage. In fact, they looked the same, Manchester Grammar School. And for a start, I don't think there's a playground at Dulwich. There certainly wasn't at that Manchester Grammar School. And people never said anything like this. Partly, I think, at MGS, there were a lot of Jewish boys, and the number of Jewish boys at Dulwich was very few. But to say, I mean, it's not just against Jewish boys, it's against Asian boys, it's against black boys, and it's really nasty. It's not just one word. It's persistent. It's bullying. It's ambushing. It's waiting for them to come out. And these people, some of them, people like Peter Ateji and Yinka Bankole, have remember this. It's scarred really in their minds. And it's the bullying aspect, which I think is also significant. And I think it's fair to say that Farage is still a bully. That's how he operates.
Well, certainly we've had people who've left his various parties over the years who do claim that. I mean, some could say some bully, some might say a strong leader who knows what has to be done and doesn't suffer fools. I mean, again, people might have different views on this, and I'm not defending him on that. Here's the thing. My guess is that Nigel Farage did say some rotten things and he wasn't a very nice person as a teenager. Does that tell us anything about the man he is now? Because I know you've been asked many times, do you believe that Nigel Farage is a racist? And you've said, no, you don't think he is. I've certainly never heard him in private ever say anything, even in drink, anything that I would have any questions about. And I would absolutely say so if I had heard him say that. Do you think he's a racist now? Do you think these allegations of what he did or did not say or did not do when he was, 11 years old or even 17-year-old has a bearing on the man he is now at 60?
Well, when I wrote the book, I thought it would be a good idea to ask everybody I could, many of whom had fallen out with Farage, because, as you say, he falls out with lots of people, and to ask them if they'd ever heard him, while he was an adult, say anything that was racist. And there's only one example, and that's from Alan Sked, who was the founder member of UKIP, the party that Farage later led. And he remembered Farage from the sort of early 90s. So what are we talking about? 32. So around about the age of 30, coming out with a very racist comment, which nobody else can corroborate or heard, but Sked is very firm about it. That's the only example. And on that basis, given that these are Farage's enemies, they threw all sorts of other stuff at him, but not that one.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's anti-Semitic. He's very pro-Israel. He's not anti-Semitic today. Yeah. However, there are other gradations of other forms of race. For instance, pandering to racism. Is some of his platform and his program and the way he operates, is he deliberately seeking the votes of racists? Is he embarrassed to have the votes of racists?
He's gone out
Has he ever repudiated?
But he's gone out of his way, has he not? No time for the Tommy Robinsons, no time. Some of the people he's got rid of from UKIP, from the Brexit Party, from the Reform, have been people over racism allegations. That he gives very short shrift to this stuff.
Well, there's a lot in that, and you're broadly right. He after all finally left UKIP. It's a complicated story in 2018 because the then leader of UKIP was getting too close to Tommy Robinson, and he thought that was wrong.
But this is the thing.
And he then set up the Brexit Party, which then became Reform.
Let's talk about how much does this damage things, because a lot of our audience, a lot of people will say, look, you know what, they're just throwing the kitchen sink at Nigel Farage. They're going to keep coming back with allegations. I mean, they tried the whole, he's a public school boy, he likes a pint. I mean, people literally we couldn't care less. They tried that about Boris Johnson and David Cameron. Didn't work with them either. But this allegation, now we've got the latest, which is actually from it would appear to be a disgruntled former Reform councillor, claiming that there was electoral fraud in Clacton. Now we know, look, the kitchen sink has been thrown at Nigel Farage at the 7 elections where he stood for Parliament and didn't get in. The parties did everything they could to stop him getting elected. But he's now accused of falsely reporting local campaign expenses in Clacton at the July 24 election. A former Reform councillor, member of the campaign team, Richard Everett, he said he submitted the documents to Met Police, claiming he shows there was an overspend on the local campaign. Is this? I mean, look, he's Reform. He's not from another party. But is there basically a concerted effort now that Nigel Farage is riding high in the polls? He's considered a serious threat to not just Labour, but to the Tories as well. That everything is going to be thrown at him, and will any of it stick?
Well, I think as Farage is somebody who could well become Prime Minister in the next few years, all journalists have a duty to examine his past and examine his character. And I've always said that about all politicians, and I've spent a lot of time doing it. On the specifics of this one about election expenses, which is another of my areas of expertise. Yes. I was involved in the investigation that led, ironically, to the convictions following of Conservatives after the campaign which they won against Nigel Farage back in South Thanet in 2015. Yep. Now, on this particular case, the problem with these allegations in terms of them sticking is that the time is up. You've got a year to actually put them in and try and overturn the results. So it's difficult to see how a conviction in terms of electoral law could come out of this, although there may be other laws involving perhaps fraud or making a false statement. And in any case, Mr. Everett, the gentleman making the allegations, the former Reform councillor, still a councillor, but not in Reform, he has said that Farage was blissfully unaware of all this.
So I'm not entirely sure how much...
You're not going to convict Farage very easily on those allegations. You may convict other people involved in the campaign, for instance, the agent.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Let's talk to Lord Young now. He's a Conservative peer and founder of the Free Speech Union about various free speech issues. But Lord Young, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, I know you've not covered this case in specifics, but are you concerned about someone being sentenced, even if it's to a suspended sentence, 6 months in custody for social media posts?
Yes, I don't think that Joey Barton should have received such a severe sentence. The Free Speech Union has been for some time campaigning for the repeal of Section 127 of the Communications Act and the Malicious Communications Act. I don't think people should be sent to jail for saying offensive things on social media.
I mean, you'd expect, say, for instance, his comments about Jeremy Vine, the BBC presenter, that's an easy libel case, surely, rather than being sent to jail.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have a right not to be called essentially a paedophile falsely on social media, I think.
Well, I mean, I don't know all the details of this case, but I understand the phrase that Joey Barton used was not intended to be taken literally. It was an insult, a kind of almost humorous insult, rather than something that was intended to be taken at face value.
It rhymes with Ponce. Bike Ponce. Have you been on Epstein Island? Are you going to be on those flights logs? Might as well own up now, because I'd phone the police if I saw you near a primary school on your bike. It's fairly clear cut, isn't it?
I don't know. To me, that the court evidently thought so.
Yeah, I mean, he was convicted.
But to my mind, that sounds like just ranting insult humour rather than allegations that are intended to be taken at face value.
It does, and it's a very difficult balance, isn't it? It is a very difficult balance. Where are you? And I imagine, judging that you were involved very much the Free Speech Union with helping Jamie Michael, a former Royal Marine, being banned from working with children after he protested in a video on Facebook against illegal migrants, but again, not calling for violence, being very categorically clear. Organise local meetings, talk to your council, go to your politicians and the like. But he said, some migrants were scumbags and psychopaths. This is in the wake of the Southport attack, which at the time people thought was an illegal migrant due to stuff on the internet. It was incorrect. It was not an illegal migrant. But the case got dismissed by a jury in 17 minutes, and yet he's still not allowed to coach his daughter's football team because apparently there are safeguarding issues.
Yeah, this is, I think, Julia, a clear-cut case of safeguarding procedures being abused to punish someone whose views the panel, in this case the panel of the Welsh Football Association, whose views they disapprove of. Nothing he said was unlawful, and that was we know that because a jury, as you say, acquitted him of the charge of stirring up racial hatred in just 17 minutes. That jury was sending a message to the Crown Prosecution Service. This is a ridiculous, absurd case that should never have come to court. We tried to make that argument. We paid for Jamie's defence. We tried to make that argument to the CPS beforehand. Drop this charge. There's nothing here. This is a ridiculous waste of everybody's time. They refused. They persisted in charging him. I think in the case of when someone is charged with stirring up racial hatred, the Attorney General of the United Kingdom has to sign off on that charge. So presumably Lord Hermer thought this was worth pursuing. Jury said, no, on your bikes. dismissed it in 17 minutes.
I mean, that's literally walking into the jury room, taking off your coats, having a vote and walking straight out again, isn't it? They didn't even have time to have a second cup of tea.
Yeah, there was clearly not much disagreement among the jurors as to Jamie's innocence. But having been found innocent, having been put through this ghastly ordeal, refused bail at one stage, the FA still decided to punish him nevertheless and say, no, you can no longer teach your daughter's football team. You can no longer work with these other teams in your community.
And he's a good bloke. This is the thing. We want dads. He's got 2 kids. We want dads to get involved, giving up his own time, volunteering. We want people to be doing this and getting kids out doing sport and being a good role model as a former Royal Marine as well. It is extraordinary. Welsh FA, they want to safeguard these girls. It's interesting, but not that bothered about letting boys play against girls when they claim to be girls who can cause them physical injury. So they're not that worried about safeguarding over the years, are they?
No, they've been pretty negligent on that issue. I think the FA has now said that biological males cannot compete against women in women's football. It's taken them a long time to reach that position, and they've only come to that conclusion seemingly quite reluctantly after the Supreme Court judgment about the meaning of sex in the Equality Act. But this is one of over a dozen cases, Julia, we have at the Free Speech Union of people who are being punished, penalised in this kind of way for safeguarding reasons, when actually they don't pose any risk to children. They're not paedophiles. They're not abusive parents. They just have, robust right-wing views.
Yeah.
And
have quite similar views to probably the majority of people in this country. But this comes back to, when, Brexiteers, when UKIP supporters were being told they couldn't foster or adopt children. This is idea. If you don't have the correct views, on the left, then you are somehow a risk. And as this man has said to you, the worst thing is, people say, well, why aren't you coach the team? I'm not allowed to. Safeguarding issues. You don't want people to think that you're a danger to children. That's the worst thing you could possibly accuse a man of.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a real smear, a horrible thing to have hanging around your head. People in his community will assume that there is a good reason, no smoke without fire, that he's been told he's a safeguarding risk to children, when all it means in this context is that he's anti-illegal immigration, which does not make him a risk to children.
I'd have thought all of us should be anti-illegal immigration. I would have thought that was a pretty solid view that most people should hold.
You would have thought so. And there are echoes here, Julia, of the way in which the Online Safety Act is used to make it harder for people to access supposedly right-wing content. So when the age gating was first enforced by Ofcom in July, whereby if material wasn't suitable for audiences of all ages, you had to prove you were 18 in order to be able to access it. Some of the material which was age-gated by the large social media platforms included someone going on an anti-immigration protest in Leeds. It included Katie Lamb reading out transcripts.
I mean, literally an MP speaking in Parliament. Let's talk about social media. I think most parents are pretty unhappy about their kids using social media, but an awful lot of parents, frankly, don't seem to care enough and quite happy for their kids to be on social media if it means they're not talking to them or causing a scene. But Australia is among the first country in the world to try to organise a social media ban for all under 16-year-olds. It comes into force later today, UK time, Wednesday, of course, Australian time. And basically, you won't be able to set up a new account. Existing profiles will have to be deactivated. You have to verify that you are over 16 to use TikTok and many of the other popular social media platforms. But is it going to work? And what implications are there for everyone else, not just around the world, but also adults? Let's talk about this to Jo Barton. She's assistant editor at The Critic. Hello, Jo.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us. I think there are a lot of parents like me. I mean, I don't have an issue with my daughter in terms of social media. She wasn't one of those kids, but a lot of kids sitting there all the time, boys and girls, not healthy for them. We've seen kids who've committed suicide. They've been, basically led into the idea that, like, you're trans, or promoting anorexia, bullying, being groomed by, sexual predators, you name it. Doesn't seem to be a good place for our kids to be. They should be out and about, playing sport, having a laugh with their mates face to face. But is this social media ban, is it actually going to be enforceable?
You know what? I think it is. So, we saw similar sort of complaints when the Online Safety Act was introduced, when age verification came into effect, and there were a lot of naysayers saying that kids would just find a way around it. And actually, when you look at the data, Pornhub itself reported that 77% fewer visits from the UK.
Wow.
And it's not even like it's being rerouted to, I don't know, Algeria or somewhere random. This is actually showing that.
I thought we were all just supposed to get VPNs or go on the dark web or something, and then we could all access. All the boys in the studio, in the office, looking a bit shy at this moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously kids and young people tend to be better and sort of, digital natives are always going to be able to find ways around it. But actually, that hasn't happened. And I think just having that small check, just that small sort of piece of accountability, whether it's age verification or any sort of law, just makes people take a step back and think. Yeah. And I think that is something that works.
And taking away the sort of the normalisation of it. I know we've talked to you about your brilliant book, Pornocracy, you've co-authored, and again, just like the normalisation of particularly, some really nasty stuff on social media. But we're not, in this case, you mentioned Pornhub there, but, this is about, supposedly all this innocent stuff with kids and TikTok videos and dances. And I think, frankly, all this stuff is horrific. I'm horrified that all these youngsters are getting their news from TikTok. That is not where you should be getting your news. Apparently, I'm big on TikTok. What a joy. But there we are. But, isn't there always an issue with age verification, where to verify who you are and that you're old enough, whether it's 16 or 18, you're having to give your identity, and a lot of people don't want to give their identity, and they don't want to give their biometric details. They don't want to basically, have some company. I mean, banks are being constantly under cyber attack. I'm not entirely sure that, TikTok or Pornhub or anyone are able to necessarily protect their data.
Oh, I mean, their whole business model depends on extracting data. I mean, they're not in it for the good of humanity. They're in it because they want your kids' data. They want to be able to track their eye movements. They want to be able to, use as much of their information as they can. So I totally get that there is a concern there about the sharing of data. But actually, when it comes to what's being proposed, it's facial age verification for the most part. So it's been left up to the platforms themselves to decide how they want to implement it.
And they're going to get big fines if they get it wrong. But haven't there been cases where kids are just putting a picture of their mum or their dad up, and then they go, yeah, you look over 16, not a problem?
Yes, there have. But the point about this law is it won't persecute the parents, it won't persecute the children. If that happens, it'll be the social media platforms themselves that will have to be accountable. And I think that's the right way to look at it, because, these are multi-billion-dollar organisations that, frankly, parents don't stand a chance against.
No. And again, they probably don't stand a chance in terms of keeping their kids off. There's also that argument, isn't there? Well, not every kid's going to comply with the law, but then they don't when it comes to drinking and smoking and drugs. But we still have those laws. There is, though, that, let's face it, that massive concern over, people's individual freedoms, civil liberties. If they can do this for under 16s, they'll do it for 18 plus as well.
Yeah, no, I understand the concerns around freedom of expression and data security. I do think there's a concern there. But at the same time, frankly, as you were saying to your previous contributor, I don't think governments are, frankly, up together enough to implement any sort of mass surveillance.
They'd love to be that competent, wouldn't they? Carl Hennigan is Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford and is joining us to talk about, lockdown and mask madness is back with a vengeance, Carl, but this time it's over flu. I thought we established that lockdowns and masks didn't actually work, but apparently they are back.
Yeah, so, Julia, they are back. But let's be clear. First thing, flu. This is a term that is an all-catching term. So we have this thing about influenza versus flu. So if you look at the South Wales school, not only have they got influenza, RSV, they've also got viral gastroenteritis because they've got vomiting and diarrhea. So all of this is predictable, folks. It happens every winter. We get this predictable rise in acute respiratory infections, and what we've done is go into global panic and meltdown again.
Here we go.
The NHS has not prepared for this, and we're talking about 1,700 extra admissions in a population of 58 million. We're talking about...
Just get it in proportion.
A trust has to prepare for winter for about 40, 50 extra cases to turn up. But to be honest, it's a revolving door. We've got a new chief executive. NHS England is going to be defunct within a year.
Yeah.
These people have no idea. I want to tell you a story on the weekend. You know, I work as an urgent care GP. Yeah. This is how bad it is. I go into the home. Somebody is seriously unwell. I can keep them in the home. I ring the crisis team. This is carers who are supposed to come out within 2 hours. Do you know what they said to us? We have no capacity. So a crisis team doesn't exist when we actually have a crisis.
That's literally what they're there for. And
so we have so many people in the back office scared, panicking, and nobody on the front line.
I was going to say the diversity officer and the net zero officer, they're on duty, they're fine. But this is the thing. So we've got schools there's one in South Wales, but other various schools closing down or banning children from singing in assembly. Again, that became one of the big things in during COVID, wasn't it? You can't sing because apparently we'll all die. But also we've got these things. Experts, we're told, experts at the UK Health Security Agency urging people to consider wearing a mask if they have symptoms of flu. Well, the thing is, if you've got flu, frankly, I've had flu once in my life. I couldn't leave my bed, let alone, walk around the pavement or get on a bus or a train. So that's a load of nonsense. If you're that ill, you should be at home anyway. But we've established beyond any reasonable doubt that the virus, the droplets of the virus, are a heck of a lot smaller than the actual holes in the mask, and they don't work. This is so well established. Why is a health agency putting this nonsense out?
Look, it is okay for people to do what they want to do, but for the UKHSA to provide advice which is not evidence-based is now unacceptable. And this is another organisation in the NHS that spends hundreds of millions of pounds, that is dysfunctional and could disappear, and we would make no difference to what's going to happen.
We'd probably be safer. But again, OK, you're ill, you can probably infect a load of people, but wear a mask. Well, no, I've got elderly relatives in their 80s. I don't visit them when I had a rotten cold the last 2 weeks, and I said, look, I'm not going to visit you because I've got a really rotten cold and I don't want to give it to you because it might affect you even worse than it's affected me. I mean, that's just normal people, being sensible, isn't it? But I mean, in terms of, where we are, again, we've had a COVID inquiry, which we know is a load of nonsense. It's still ongoing, costing a fortune. And they seem to be looking at completely the wrong questions and certainly coming up with the wrong answers. And we discussed that recently, you and I. But this is why we need a proper COVID inquiry to actually establish that lockdowns don't work. That's why they work the opposite of the pandemic plan. Masks don't work. That's why they weren't advised at the beginning and not normally advised. I mean, but most of the lessons that seem to have been learnt from the COVID pandemic is the exact opposite of what is evidence-based.
So not only do they not work, we know that if you close schools, they're actually very harmful for children and their education. Yep. So actually you're creating harm.
Who knew keeping kids at home for a year was going to be bad for them, eh?
The second issue here is we seem to now live in a world of fear and panic all the time.
Yeah.
You're from a generation in the 70s when we would turn up to school. If they tried to close the school, we'd have gone, well, where do we go now? My mum and dad are away. Nobody knows where we are. Different generation. But they're all linked, you see. If you understand why everybody has mental health problems, because all the time you're telling them there's around the corner, mutant strain, there's no NHS to protect you, then no wonder everybody is panicking and fearful. This is all connected. We've got the wrong people in the wrong jobs at the moment trying to help out and sort this system. It is completely failing. It's about time we had a change of tact. And please, West Streeting, not another review.
Oh, absolutely. Two-tier policing and protests, yes, it's what's happening, and Sadiq Khan is part of the problem, and he needs to not be in control of the Metropolitan Police. How much of that do you agree with?
All of it. I've read a lot of the report. If you look at that, what it says about the fear of the Jewish community, how those fears were simply ignored. That's one side of the thing. Then you had that UKIP march, which was supposed to happen in Whitechapel, which was immediately banned. So you just see the sort of thing that we've seen in the past with the different policing that you get for Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion against, the Unite Britain or how football fans are treated. So, and I do tend to agree that the Home Secretary used to be in charge of the Metropolitan Police. The Metropolitan Police has got such wide-ranging powers. They have they run the counter-terrorism for the country and the like. They really should be under the Home Secretary. This failed experiment with Sadiq Khan, and also the other thing is politics, of course, as well. Sadiq Khan has gone out of his way to say, right, we're going to stop or reduce stop and search significantly because that appeals to my voters. The consequences is that particularly more young black men get killed and
Yeah, I'll talk to the young black men's mothers, because the ones who either are stabbing or being stabbed, they want stop and search.
Yeah, absolutely, and you have a massive increase in crime. The Met Police will say, of course, some of this crime was reduced, but when you look at the stats of say knife crime compared to Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, other major cities, London is far ahead. And some of the report goes on to say, for example, the Met are solving 1 out of 20 burglaries and robberies.
I'm amazed it's that high.
I
mean, they only go out to 1 in 20 robberies or burglaries. Genuinely, I don't think a week goes by in this office without someone coming in. They've done it again, this week, who's had their phone stolen. Not 1 week. It's just the normal thing. And then when you find out, like, London's the phone theft capital. If you're talking about £1,000 phones, phone theft capital of Europe. 1 in 20 robberies and burglaries solved. 1 in 13 shoplifting offences. Again, amazed it's that high. And 1 in 179
Julie, can I just say with that?
things.
Julie, with the shoplifting, we've got to clarify that, because the vast majority of shopliftings are never reported.
Yeah, they don't bother.
Those 13 that are reported are where somebody's gone in there and I either nicked something really, really expensive, or there's been some violence towards somebody. Most shopkeepers accept that somebody grabs hold of something and runs out. So those stats are highly dubious. Most people report robberies and burglaries. But can I say, Julie, the main problem here is a lack of focus, in the sense that the police used to focus on catching criminals and preventing crime. And I always say I was proud to be a Scotland Yard detective, and there are many hard-working officers still trying to do these things. But what you have is, for the last 2 decades more, you've had a complete focus on diversity. We must have more female officers. We must have more black officers, all this sort of carry on. And what we were told, that this would improve trust and confidence in police. The reality is, trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police is at rock bottom. It's the lowest it's ever been, 46% or something like that. And so what you have is they've reduced their crime-fighting abilities and focused on just recruiting by identity politics. And now we have a situation where crime is out of control, and the public don't trust the police. What kind of nonsense is that? That is poor leadership, and something.
And it is about the leadership. And again, I was more impressed with Sir Mark Rowley after Cressida Dick. She was, absolutely atrocious. But he's been in office for 3 years. He keeps turning up after every report and every failing and, saying, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to deal with it. But a lot of people don't really feel things are actually being dealt with. We've got, the report's entitled A Long, Long Way to Go. I would have added about another 14 longs in that. And this, again, it's about, also, if you care about the economy, you need people to feel safe. You want people to feel this is a country they can come and live in, a city they can come and live in, and tourists want to come and visit, and they feel safe, they're not worried. Because it certainly puts me off. I think, I want to go to a country, and they go, well, it's high crime. I think, yeah, I won't go there. I'll go to a different country. It does put people off. And again, so many people are just afraid for their safety, afraid for their belongings, and just don't feel that, the police are on their side. They're too busy putting rainbow ribbon on, taking the knee to BLM, and being, and basically policing in no meaningful way, as in just walking along the side of, hate marches, which intimidate people. And of course, all with a big thumbs up from Sadiq Khan.